Hi everyone, how are we doing today? I'm in such great mood because I had this awesome new jumpsuit from Forever 21 that I basically want to live in. And also it's 2 weeks until my triathlon, and then the next day I get to go to Italy and also to Prague. So I suggest if you ever do a triathlon or something, you should definitely reward yourself with a trip to Europe afterward because it helps you train way harder. But since I'm in such a good mood today, I want to talk to you about something that typically doesn't put us in the best mood, which is going to be handling customer complaints and issues. Everyone makes mistakes. I actually judge companies more by their ability to handle mistakes well than I do by their ability to not make mistakes in the first place. Of course, it's always gonna be great when your order goes perfectly the first time, but if you get something that's a little bit wrong or you're not happy with the customer service, then that's gonna put a very different spin on your interaction with that company, and that company can either really make a lifetime customer by handling it well, or they can make a lifetime enemy by not handling it well. So I like to use Amazon as an example. We've probably all lost a couple Amazon Prime packages in our day, and if you have called them to handle it, you probably had a great experience. I've always had great experiences with them. They're well known for having great customer service, especially if they have issues. They typically just ship something out the next day. They've even given me credits on my account for my inconvenience, even when it didn't end up being a big issue. So we all know and love Amazon for this reason. So I like to just kind of remember that when I'm thinking about my own customer service experiences, because even though they're different, we want to embody that same feeling, and you want your customers to have that same feeling about your company that they do about Amazon. So today we're going to talk about how to handle these situations professionally, but also in your personal life. Because we're small business owners, it's hard to separate the two sometimes. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to just handle that and not let it bog you down and the issues that make you feel negative about your business. So let's start with handling them professionally. In most cases, there's a little bit of fault for any kind of issue, especially in a creative world, on both sides. So for instance, if you're a photographer and your client calls you to tell you that you missed getting a picture of them with their mom at their wedding. So yes, a shot of the bride and her mom might seem like a pretty obvious one, but also that client may not have put it on their list. They may have been an hour and a half behind schedule. The mom may have been off where the photographer couldn't find them throughout the day, chatting with their friends. There's a lot of different things that could go wrong on either side. So in a lot of cases, there's kind of a little give and take on both sides. What we talked about in another video is having a really strong contract, and this is reason number one. So most of the time, if there is an issue, if you have a strong contract, it's pretty easy to tell who is right technically and who is wrong. And this doesn't mean that you're both gonna feel the same way and it's gonna be easy for that person to accept the blame or easy for you to accept the blame, but if you have a contract in place, there is technically a right or wrong that they have signed off on, that you have signed off on, and that you're both held liable to. And in the worst case, if it comes to a legal issue, your contract is gonna be your number one protector in that case. So no matter whose fault it ends up being, there's a few things that you can do to help alleviate that tension and to keep your clients having a great experience with your company. So first of all, try not to use words like sorry or unfortunately. It's so our tendency, especially as a woman, it's really our tendency to apologize, to over apologize for everything. But up front, you especially don't want to use these words because they set a negative tone for the whole conversation and they assume the blame on your behalf. So if you say you're sorry, then it's going to make it seem subconsciously like you've already accepted the blame, and the client's going to view it as, okay, this is their fault. They did something wrong. They definitely owe me all of this. And that may not turn out to be the case once you delve deeper into the issue. So if you want to set a really positive tone, you don't want to apologize for anything that's not your fault. For instance, a custom stamp company recently stopped making custom stamps because they were having issues with the post office, and this affected a ton of my clients. However, there was nothing I could do about this. They stopped one day, deleted all their stamp products, and that was it. So if we hadn't ordered those yet, my clients were definitely affected. However, I had nothing to do with this. So basically, I reached out to them. I did not apologize. I did not say unfortunately because I didn't want to set them up for a negative tone. I told them what happened. gave them their options for moving forward, and reminded them that they were still going to have a beautiful suite. We were going to get their custom stamps made, or a reasonable alternative from the post office. And all the clients were okay with that because I didn't frame it in a negative light. It's kind of like when your baby falls on the ground. If you start freaking out, they think they're hurt. But if you just say, oh, haha, you had a boo-boo, they start laughing and think it's all good. So you got to set that tone correctly for your clients, and also legally, if you've admitted fault by apologizing for something and it gets to the court system later, you're actually going to have a lot more trouble proving that the other person is at fault, if that is the case. Secondly, you want to delve into this conversation a little bit further. Often there's a lot more information about their complaint, and you want to make sure you understand it completely, as well as what they're asking for you to do to solve that complaint. So sometimes it's just helpful to pick up the phone and talk through it with them, and it might be a completely different answer than what you assumed via email. During this time, try not to over-explain, because you might complicate things or confuse them. They don't really need to know about all the back-end processes that go into whatever piece or whatever they're complaining about. They don't really need to know that. They just kind of need to know this happened, what are our options moving forward, and what's going to make the most sense. So ask questions mostly, and actually when you're talking to them at first, you don't need to necessarily offer solutions. It's perfectly acceptable to say, let me go back, talk to my printers, and come back to you with our options. And that shows them that you've heard them, that you understand them, and that you're trying to figure out the best option. And some things just aren't going to be possible, but they'll understand that you're reaching out and figuring that out, and then you have a chance to compose yourself and give the best responses and really think through them, as opposed to being put on the spot. One question that I like is to simply ask them what their preferred outcome would be, because it might be different than what you're immediately thinking being in the industry. So it might be something that's a little bit easier, more cost-effective, quicker. It might be something unreasonable as well, but at least then you know where they're coming from and where you're coming from, and you can hopefully meet in the middle somewhere. Just make sure during this stage that you keep everything in writing. In the case of a phone call, follow up immediately with an email recap in case you need to recap in a legal setting. Hopefully we're going to avoid that, but it can happen, so you want to have everything in writing to protect yourself. When you're providing options for a solution, our first instinct as a small business owner is to really just give up the whole farm, because we just want to make this customer happy no matter what and move on from it. However, this is one area where we differ from Amazon a great deal. So as Amazon, they can just send out a new bottle of shampoo if yours gets lost in the mail, because their costs are really low on that, and they have a huge mass of orders to make up those costs. However, as a small business owner, this isn't necessarily the case. So an entire reprint of a suite could cut into a bunch of savings for me and completely deplete my profit margin on that order. And sometimes even with rush fees, it might even make it so that I'm actually paying to reproduce that order, which means that I shouldn't have even taken it on in the first place. So my favorite offer is always one that's going to cost me the least, and sometimes this is a creative solution. For instance, offering free thank you cards instead of reprinting a suite that has already been sent out, or offering day of goods at cost or something like that. So if you have that phone conversation with them, you might come up with something that's a little bit creative that might be just easier to produce or more cost effective for you as a business. So try not to offer the entire free farm, full refund thing at the beginning, because you do want to have some room to negotiate, and most times they're not going to be unreasonable either, and they're going to understand that this is your livelihood, and they're just going to want you to fix the problem to the best of your ability. I often like to post complicated issues in my community Facebook groups to see if anyone has dealt with this before or has good advice, and spoiler alert, they almost always do. So typically there is a middle ground compromise that will satisfy the customer without bankrupting you or eating your entire profit from an order. If it turns out that the client is at fault, you also should try not to feel too much sympathy for them and give away the farm for that reason. So in the wedding industry specifically, and I know all creative business owners are so personally attached to their business that it's hard not to get emotionally involved with clients. However, they should at the very least be covering your costs for anything that you have to redo, especially if by your contract it is their fault. So if a client didn't order enough flowers for a wedding, for instance, and you have to send one of your workers back to your studio, get the flowers, put them together, and rush all of this in the middle of a wedding day, you may feel bad about it because the client may be, kind of freaking out and having a meltdown. However, you still have to pay your people to do that. You still have to pay for the flowers. So try really hard not to feel guilty about it. This is a business transaction, even though it is during one of the most personal times in their life in a lot of cases. It is a business transaction. So anytime you give things away, people are just going to keep asking for more. So make sure you do account for any costs and any time that you have to spend, and make sure you bill that if it did turn out to be their fault. And no matter who is at fault in a situation, make sure you never, ever, ever treat your clients poorly. There's never a reason to be overly sassy or rude to a client. And also, you may want to complain on social media or Facebook if you're having a difficult situation. But if you are bad-mouthing your client, there is always going to be someone somewhere with a connection who's willing to send them a screenshot where you least expect it. So I've seen this happen so many times. And it just kind of breaks my heart, because as a client, I would hate to see that someone was talking about me like that, especially when you don't necessarily feel like you're in the wrong in the situation and they're showing one side of the story on social media. So I also try really, really hard not to specifically talk about anyone or use derogatory statements about clients, and no matter how emotional I might feel about them, because when I see other people doing that, I tend to respect them a little bit less as a vendor, because I just think it's really unprofessional. Even if you're not saying that directly to the client, it could always get back to them. So it's always just a good policy to be positive, admit that you're having a tough situation, but don't treat them in a negative way, and don't, call them crazy or say that they're being a bitch or anything like that. That's just always disrespectful, and there's no reason to treat anyone like that. On the other hand, don't let clients treat you poorly either. They don't deserve disrespect. You don't deserve disrespect either. So if you're working through a problem and someone is being insulting or demeaning in any way, feel free to contact your lawyer and send them a termination of contract letter, especially if you've already met the terms of their contract. They have no legal grounds to come back on you for that. So follow the terms of the contract. You send them the product that they've paid for, and just move on from it. There's no reason to continue to entertain that insulting behavior. Lastly, just try to be realistic with yourself and with your clients. We know this is a huge emotional day for them, but sometimes clients just have unreasonable expectations. So one time I went back and forth with a client trying to find the exact shade of blush pink paper that she wanted to match her bridesmaid dresses. And we went through like 10 different options, and I just eventually had to tell her that I didn't think what she wanted existed in the world. And yes, you can have custom paper dyed, but that's going to cost way too much money and miss your deadline. So we just had to settle on something that was close, and obviously no one's holding up the invitations to the bridesmaid dress. So in reality, it's not going to be a big deal if you're a shade or two off from that. This can happen after the fact as well. Maybe you order a certain type of flower and it showed up the day before the wedding and they were brown and dry because something went wrong in the shipping process. This isn't your fault. These things happen, but the best way to handle this is just to be 100% upfront from the beginning, and provide them with any possible solutions that they have available to them at that time, and maybe make a recommendation on which one you would do first. You can own up to what happened without accepting 100% of the blame if you keep your head on your shoulders and show that you care about giving them the best possible outcome. So that's the most important part. As long as you show that they're heard, that you know there's an issue, and that you're willing to do what you can to fix it, most of the time clients are going to be reasonable with you as well. On a personal level, I know how hard it is when these things happen. My poor boyfriend has been privy to so many crying meltdowns because I've had mistakes or customers have treated me poorly when anything has gone wrong. So there's a few ways to deal with this, and I've just noticed that the more calmly and professionally I handle them and I think about them, the more things tend to just kind of work themselves out. So I used to like run to the store or run to my computer, call my suppliers, order backup stuff, overnighted, buy everything that Michael's had in a certain color, all this stuff. And it turned out that usually after I had done this, the client was open to, you know, waiting a couple days and we could just reorder regularly, or the client was okay with what happened actually, and so it didn't need to. So I was wasting a lot of time and money and stress just freaking out about all these things immediately. So if you have that further conversation with them, a lot of times you can just de-stress yourself in a lot of ways by just handling it a little bit more calmly and taking a step back from it. So things that have helped me with this, I noticed a huge difference after I started doing yoga, and time also helps. So the more clients you deal with and the more issues that you encounter, the less personally you're going to take all of them. So I know it's hard if you're dealing with your first client issue right now, but just the more that you think about it, it's not going to be your second wedding, your third wedding, your fourth client. It's going to be just another client having a little issue, and you'll feel a lot more comfortable about dealing with that with a step back. So it's important to remember to be nice to yourself, but also be honest with yourself, especially if you're trying to take real value from this experience that may have otherwise been negative. So to turn this to a positive, you can get a really good learning experience if you properly evaluate what happened. So in a future video, we're going to be talking a lot about self-evaluation, and this is a really important time to do it when something does go wrong. So what you can do is take a step back. As we mentioned, there's typically fault a little bit on both sides. So think about where the actual disconnect happened between what was supposed to happen and what actually turned out to happen. So if you look at your process flow and you look at which step was the disconnect, and where the problem happened, then you can see what expectation you can set or what actions you can take so that the same issue doesn't happen again in the future. So avoiding this in the future may require setting a different expectation with your clients in the first place, or if you've noticed during the issue that there wasn't a clear cut and dry right or wrong listed in your contract, then maybe this is the time to get with your lawyer and revise the contract to include a clause about color differentiation, shipping of flowers, things like that, shots on the wedding day that we talked about. And once you've identified the problem and put steps into place to solve it, try your best to move on. Don't dwell on the extra money you had to spend to reprint. Don't dwell on a customer who may have left your company with an unhappy experience. You've done the best you can, and while it may suck, you'll probably make sure in the future that you'll never have this happen again. So if you actually treat it like a learning experience and try to take the positive away from it, then it actually can come into a positive experience, and you may actually appreciate that more in the long run. So some things that I've done in the past are, if I make mistakes more than once, I just write them down and tape them up on my desk so that it's right there in front of me and I know not to make those mistakes again, and I see it every day, so it's always in my head. But if you just kind of follow these steps and handle everything professionally and try to take a step back from it and don't get emotional about it, then most of the time your clients are also going to be reasonable and they're going to accept the solutions that you're able to offer and leave feeling great about the experience of dealing with you because they know you went a little bit above and beyond to handle their issue.